What does it mean when the woman who never once chose you suddenly rushes into a burning building to pull you out?
Because for 7 years, every time it mattered, she chose someone else. So why would a fire be any different?
Song Xian had been many things to Qingyan over the past 7 years.
A fiancé on paper, a presence she tolerated, a man she never once fought for.
And now, in the space of 3 days, he had decided to stop waiting for her to change.
He had given her a chance, not because he believed in her, but because he wanted her to see herself clearly.
3 days. That was the deal. 3 days where Qingyan had to choose him over Ji Mingxuan, completely and without hesitation.
Chang Susu was the witness. She had heard the terms and nodded, thinking the task was simple enough.
It was only 3 days after all.
But Song Xian had already walked out of that room, knowing exactly how it would end.
At the door, Chang Susu said she admired him for still giving Qingyan a chance.
Song Xian turned to her with a quiet smile and told her the truth. He wasn't giving Qingyan a chance at all. He was giving her the opportunity to confirm what he already knew about her.
Chang Susu's eyes went wide.
Song Xian's voice was steady, unhurried, and completely without anger. Qingyan couldn't do it. Not in 3 days, not in 30.
The one she truly loved was Ji Mingxuan. She just couldn't accept losing Song Xian on top of that.
He said it without bitterness, more like a doctor naming a diagnosis he had long since confirmed.
What Song Xian didn't realize was that Qingyan had been standing just inside the door the whole time.
She heard every word, and something inside her chest twisted in a way she couldn't name. Not guilt, exactly. Not grief. Something sharper and more confusing than either.
She didn't understand why, if she had already decided to try, Song Xian wouldn't even believe her for 3 days.
Chang Susu walked back inside and looked at her with tired frustration.
She told Qingyan plainly, "Don't mess this up."
If she couldn't hold on for 3 days, Song Xian leaving would be entirely her own doing.
Qingyan said nothing, but something cold and quiet shifted behind her eyes. The next morning, she had already transferred Qianyu back without being asked.
Song Yan noticed. He said nothing, only watching.
They had breakfast together. She went to work. He went to the university to handle administrative matters. That evening, she asked him to dinner, the steak they had missed the last time. Sitting across from her, Song Xian watched her phone light up with Ji Mingxuan's name. She didn't hesitate. She hung up without a word. He called again. She hung up again. Then she blocked him entirely. Song Xian almost laughed.
She glanced over at him. "What are you laughing at?"
He told her he was happy. He said she did well. But inside, he felt nothing but cold disdain.
He had overestimated her. He thought she would face Ji Mingxuan directly.
Instead, she was hiding, blocking calls, avoiding the problem, buying herself 3 quiet days.
That wasn't resolution. That was delay. And Ji Mingxuan was not the kind of man who accepted being blocked. The more she avoided him, the more extreme he would become.
Song Xian already looked forward to what was coming.
That evening, Qingyan took him to one of the most elite suit boutiques in the city.
Custom designs, one-of-a-kind pieces, and a manager who recognized her on sight.
Qingyan pointed at Song Xian and gave her instructions simply, pick him something.
The manager brought out a tailcoat in deep blue, encased in a transparent display box. Under the lights, it seemed to glow with something beyond fabric and thread.
Song Xian's eyes lit up before he could stop them. Qingyan saw it, and before he said a word, she turned to the manager. They would take it. Outside the boutique window, a man named Lu Cheng stood watching them through the glass. A cold smile curled at the corner of his mouth.
He took a photograph of them and sent it to Ji Mingxuan with a single line.
Miss Su will attend a banquet the night after tomorrow with Song Xian. She is picking out a suit for him.
Ji Mingxuan received the photo, and his expression turned almost unhinged.
He replied immediately, "Send him a photo of Song Xian's face."
The night of the banquet arrived on the 3rd day, the day Song Xian had planned to leave.
He had suspected Ji Mingxuan wouldn't be able to hold out, but now that thought almost made him laugh.
Qingyan hadn't even gone to the office during these 3 days.
She knew herself well enough to know she couldn't refuse Ji Mingxuan in person. So she hid. 3 days of hiding, like a wall she could stand behind and call it a choice. After getting dressed and styled, Song Xian stood in front of the mirror in the blue tailcoat.
His phone lit up, a message from Qingyan telling him to come out. The next second, another message arrived. This one from Ji Mingxuan.
4 words. I have a surprise for you. Song Xian curved his lips into a quiet smile. He hadn't provoked Ji Mingxuan once during these 3 days. He hadn't needed to. Ji Mingxuan could stir himself up just fine.
Song Xian pocketed his phone, took a breath, and walked down.
The banquet that night gathered the most powerful names in the capital.
Contracts worth billions changed hands in casual conversation.
The kind of room where every glance carried weight and every entrance was a statement. Qingyan stood at the very top of that world, and the moment she entered, heads turned. Song Xian walked beside her, striking, composed, impossible to ignore.
People looked at him with strange expressions.
Everyone knew the story. The fiancé whose engagement had fallen apart twice.
Nobody quite understood what was happening between them.
Qingyan looped her arm through his, and Song Xian watched her work the room.
She laughed at the right moments, spoke at the right volumes, never missing a beat.
And then a gasp spread through the crowd, sharp and sudden, cutting through the noise.
The next second, Ji Mingxuan's voice rang out from behind them, warm and deliberate.
Song Yen felt Qingyan's body go rigid against his arm.
He almost laughed. Did she really believe she could avoid Ji Mingxuan forever?
They turned together, and the moment Song Xian saw Ji Mingxuan, he understood the gasps. Ji Mingxuan was wearing the exact same suit.
The same blue tailcoat, the same design, down to the last button.
But as the saying goes, matching outfits aren't frightening on their own.
Whoever wears it worst is the one left embarrassed. Ji Mingxuan was not poorly dressed, but Song Xian had been styled with precision, from the cut to the posture.
The comparison was instant, and the crowd made it without hesitation.
Whispers spread through the hall like a current. Only 2 of these suits existed in the world, one held by a prince overseas, one here tonight.
The crowd looked between the 2 men, and the answer felt obvious before anyone asked the question. One was real, one was a replica, and they could see the difference in the craftsmanship.
Ji Mingxuan's face drained of color. He turned to Qingyan, his eyes wide and pleading, insisting that his was the genuine piece. The hall went absolutely still.
This was no longer a question about suits.
Everyone understood what was really being asked. Who would Qingyan choose?
Not a breath stirred. Not a word was spoken. The moment had come, and the entire room held it in suspension.
Song Xian stood quietly to one side, a faint smile on his face, and said nothing at all. Every gaze in the room pressed down on Qingyan. She stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, her eyes cold and fixed on Ji Mingxuan.
And then she spoke.
Go change. Ji Mingxuan flinched as if struck. He nodded, already turning toward the door.
But Qingyan's voice came again, sharper this time.
Not you.
She turned and looked at Song Xian. A thin thread of helplessness crossed her face.
There's a lounge with spare outfits. You go change. Song Xian raised an eyebrow. What if I don't?
Her voice softened just slightly. Be good. Don't make trouble.
Song Xian felt the laughter dissolve in his chest and turn into something hard and bright. At a time like this, with Ji Mingxuan standing there in a counterfeit suit, she thought he was the problem.
The room had seen everything. Anyone with eyes knew exactly who was making trouble.
Song Xian had already known this would happen. He had never once expected anything different from her.
And still, standing there in that hall, something inside him finally reached its limit.
Without a word, he raised his hand and struck her across the face.
The sound cracked through the silence like a whip.
A red mark bloomed instantly across Qingyan's cheek, bright against the shock frozen on her face.
The entire hall stopped breathing.
Song Xian smiled, a cold, mocking curve of the lips.
Since we're making a scene, why do anything small?
Ji Mingxuan roared and lunged across the room, planting himself in front of Qingyan.
His voice shook with rage. What right did Song Xian have to hit her? Song Xian looked at him without raising his voice.
He told Ji Mingxuan he hit her because he felt like it.
And as for what business it was of his, none at all.
Then he looked at them both, side by side, and said what had been true for a long time.
One scum and one trash, locked together. Stop dragging innocent people into it.
He put his hands in his pockets, turned, and walked away.
Behind him, Qingyan called his name.
He turned back just once. He looked at her, smiled wide, pointed to his lips, and to the wide expanse of the room.
It was a warning she understood immediately.
And then he turned again and kept walking, and this time he did not stop.
Qingyan stood frozen.
Something she couldn't name rose in her chest, a sudden, irrational panic. The feeling that if he walked through that door tonight, she would lose him forever.
She took one step to follow him.
Then Ji Mingxuan's hand caught hers, and he crumpled, blood trailing from the corner of his mouth. Qingyan's attention snapped to him instantly. She caught him. She helped him up. She rushed him to the hospital.
The hall stood in the wreckage of the scene, trading silent looks.
Among them, Jihan Shang watched from a distance and smiled to himself.
From the outside, it looked like Ji Mingxuan had won the moment. But Jihan Shang had caught something the others missed, the urgency on Qingyan's face when Song Xian left.
That expression wasn't the face of a woman who had gotten what she wanted.
And Ji Mingxuan, fainting at exactly the right moment, blood appearing at exactly the right second, Jihan Shang genuinely admired the timing.
To have such an opponent was a kind of misfortune.
Outside, a car was already waiting for Song Xian. He climbed in and settled into the seat. The woman beside him, the one he called Jiaoyi, looked at him with unconcealed warmth.
She had already prepared clothes for the flight. Wearing a tailcoat to catch a plane wasn't ideal. Song Xian smiled and pulled the partition down to change. When he emerged, the weight of the night had already begun to lift from his shoulders.
His phone lit up in his pocket, Qingyan's name on the screen. He looked at it for a moment and powered the phone off entirely. Qingyan's call fell into silence. She tried again. The line was dead.
She called the villa. He hadn't returned.
She called Shen Zichen, asking if Song Xian had gone to her brother.
Shen Zichen paused and told her plainly. Her brother had already cursed Qingyan out multiple times since he came back.
Even if he knew where Song Xian was, he wouldn't say.
Qingyan went quiet on the line.
She hung up and ordered people to search. No hotel check-ins, no phone signal, no trail at all.
Surveillance footage showed him getting into a white car after the banquet. Her people traced it through intersection after intersection, until one camera turned out to be broken.
The car vanished from the footage and didn't reappear.
Qingyan stared at the frozen frame on the screen.
Her face became colder by the second. She told her assistant Zhang Xiaoxiao to keep searching, turn the capital upside down if necessary.
Zhang Xiaoxiao nodded and noted aloud. Whoever was helping Song Xian had planned this in advance.
At that moment, a call came through. Lin Jiyu, Qingyan's vice president.
Qingyan stared at the screen and let it ring out.
Zhang Xiaoxiao's phone rang next. It was also Lin Jiyu.
She stepped aside to answer, then turned back with a changed expression.
Vice President Lin said she knew where Song Yin was.
Qingyan took the phone without hesitation.
Lin Jiyu had been at the airport for a flight abroad. She thought she saw Song Xian in the adjacent lounge.
Zhang Xiaoxiao immediately checked his name against all flight records. No purchase registered anywhere. Lin Jiyu insisted, check the airport surveillance directly.
The cameras found him within minutes.
Clear footage of Song Xian seated close beside a woman, and then the two of them boarding together.
Zhang Xiaoxiao traced the flight and found it.
4 overseas study slots from Imperial Capital University.
Special tickets with no standard registration. That was why his name hadn't shown up before.
Su Qingyan looked at the woman in the footage beside Song Xian.
She recognized her immediately as the Jiaoyi. Something in Su Qingyan's eyes shifted, a storm gathering without sound.
He hadn't just left. He had run away with another woman entirely.
Song Xian and the Jiaoyi landed in a transfer country the next morning and caught a connecting flight onward.
By the following afternoon, the plane touched down in a city that felt like a different world entirely.
Flowers lined the roads from the airport. The air was clean and unhurried.
An hour's drive brought them to the place they would stay.
It was the Jiaoyi's house, a loft she had owned for years, with an upper floor, a lower floor, and a wide balcony that faced the entire town.
From that balcony, you could watch the sun rise and set and see flowers blooming all the way to the horizon.
Song Xian stood on it and felt something inside him begin to breathe again.
The Jiaoyi had prepared everything. The house, the enrollment, the spare room upstairs, warmed and decorated.
When Song Xian stood at the door and saw how carefully it had been arranged, he felt heat rise to his face.
This had clearly been planned long before she asked him to come.
He turned to her, genuinely moved, and thanked her.
She smiled and told him, "Thank you too for being willing to come and stay with me."
That evening, she cooked, and he promised to cook the next night.
They settled into a rhythm quickly, two people who fit the same pace without trying.
Back in the capital, Zheng Xiaoxiao reported to Su Qingyan under the pressure of a silence that felt like a blade. All 4 exchange students had been accounted for, except 2, Song Xian and the Jiaoyi.
They had transferred from the transit country to an unknown destination.
The trans-country was vast, and its airports connected to everywhere in the world. None of it was within Su Qingyan's reach.
Zheng Xiaoxiao promised to continue the search. Su Qingyan told her not to stop until he was found.
The moment Zhang Xiaoxiao left the room, she was practically running.
She called Cheng Susu in a panic. She wasn't sure she would survive this job.
Su Qingyan had been radiating something terrifying for days, calm on the surface, completely unstable underneath.
Cheng Susu snorted on the other end. Serves her right.
She had already heard about the banquet, about Song Xian leaving, about him going abroad with another woman.
A part of her wanted to applaud him.
She told Zhang Xiaoxiao quietly, "Even if you find him, don't report it. Give him a way out."
Zhang Xiaoxiao's voice nearly cracked. She was the one who would suffer if nothing was found.
She asked Cheng Susu if she had any way to contact Song Xian.
Chang Susu paused and admitted she had sent him messages, all of them unread. He had already closed that door. Even Cheng Susu was on the outside of it now.
The only person who might still have a thread was Shen Weixia. Shen Weixia was at home playing games with the air conditioning on when the front door came open.
Su Qingyan walked in, flanked by 6 bodyguards, her aura like a dropped temperature.
She stood over him and asked where Song Xian was.
Shen Weixia reacted with surprise and then with anger. He didn't know.
Su Qingyan's voice dropped to something colder. She gave him one more chance.
Shen Weixia panicked and bolted for the stairs. 2 bodyguards caught his arms like criminals and dragged him back.
Su Qingyan looked at him with something frightening in her eyes.
This was her last chance to ask nicely. Where was he?
Shen Weixia gritted his teeth. He didn't know.
A look from Su Qingyan was all it took. One of the bodyguards wrenched his arm.
Not a dislocation, but enough force to send cold sweat pouring down his back.
In that moment, the front door exploded open with a bang.
Shen Zichen walked in at a pace that left no room for conversation.
She crossed the room and struck Su Qingyan hard enough to knock her to the ground.
Her face was full of rage.
She had heard Shen Weixia scream from the doorway and nearly lost her mind.
She pulled her brother free and looked him over with desperate concern before turning back to Su Qingyan.
If you want your man, find your man. What right does she have to touch her brother?
Su Qingyan rose slowly, her eyes still fixed on Shen Weixia.
Even Shen Zichen felt something uncomfortably shift in the air. meeting that gaze. Su Qingyan asked again, word by word, "Where is he?" Shen Weishao's heart was hammering, but Chen Zichen's hand on his back gave him courage. He looked Su Qingyan in the face and said it straight. "Su Qingyan, I don't know." And even if he did know, he wouldn't tell her, because she was a lunatic, a pit of fire. She wasn't worthy of Song Xian. The words landed like a fist. Su Qingyan's lips turned pale. Her gaze went strange and slow, and she began walking toward him. Shen Zichen stepped in front of her brother. Then Chang Susu appeared from nowhere and drove a needle straight into Su Qingyan's neck. The sedative hit fast. Su Qingyan's legs buckled and she went down. But even unconscious, her eyes stayed locked on Shen Weishao until the very last second. Shen Weishao had never seen anything like that in his life. It shook him deep. Cheng Susu's hands were unsteady as she ordered the bodyguards to carry Su Qingyan out. She told Shen Weixiao to stay out of sight. Su Qingyan had gone mad, and this was a relapse. Chang Susu brought Su Qingyan directly to Gu Yuyu's private clinic. She barely had to explain. Gu Yuyu took one look and understood. She had gone over a decade without an episode, and now this. Gu Yuyu asked quickly, "What happened?" Chang Susu sighed. Song Xian ran away. Gu Yuyu's expression shifted. She had treated Su Qingyan since childhood. She knew the diagnosis intimately. Severe bipolar disorder, onset from a very young age. It had taken 5 years of treatment to bring it under control. Over 10 years of stability after that. And now, Song Xian's departure had undone all of it. Medically speaking, someone with Su Qingyan's condition had almost no capacity for emotional attachment. Her emotions were flattened, indifferent, nearly absent. The idea that losing a man had broken through that wall made no clinical sense. Chang Susu looked at the motionless figure on the bed and felt her chest tighten. She asked Gu Yuyu carefully, what if this was triggered specifically by Song Xian leaving? What if he never came back? The question stopped Gu Yuyu cold. She set up the IV and administered the medication before speaking slowly. Su Qingyan had been suppressing herself for years. Song Xian might have been the one thing holding her steady. Losing that, losing him, had become the breaking point. Gu Yuyu chose her words carefully. Su Qingyan had never received love in childhood. Song Xian was likely the only person who had ever loved her without conditions. She didn't know how to love him back, but she had still depended on being loved by him. The sudden loss of something that intense, it was a severe fall. Whether that counted as love, Gu Yuyu couldn't say. She deliberately avoided that word, because for someone like Su Qingyan, love wasn't supposed to be possible. Meanwhile, Song Xian had already been in the new city for a week. Classes in the morning, afternoons sketching in the hills with teachers and classmates. Evenings reviewing lessons while the town went quiet outside his window. Simple, full, honest days. Shen Weishao managed to get a message through warning him Su Qingyan was still searching. Song Xian stopped using his domestic bank cards immediately. Every expense now ran through the secondary card that Jiaoyi had given him. He needed his own money. Among the things he had taken when he left was the True Love Star, the jade pendant Su Qingyan had once given him as a betrothal gift. Inside its clasp were 2 sets of initials, not his and hers and Ji Mingxuan's. He hadn't told the Jiaoyi about it. Instead, he told her he was going to sketch in the capital of the neighboring country with a classmate. Her name was Nesk, a European-styled city an hour away by high-speed rail. He and his classmate Zhang Feng arrived in the morning and tracked down Uncle Joe, an antique dealer in his 50s, short and shark-eyed. Uncle Joe looked at the jade pendant and his eyes lit up. "Excellent quality," he said. He examined the clasp carefully and asked Song Xian where he had gotten it. Song Xian smiled and said he stole it. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes and clarified. The origin was legitimate. He just needed funds. Uncle Joe offered 30 million,
Song Xian countered without blinking. 40 million. Deal. The transfer hit his new overseas account immediately, untraceable by Su Qingyan's people.
Song Xian pulled Zhang Feng along and insisted on celebrating with a proper meal.
Zhang Feng took him straight to the best restaurant in Nesk, Moonlight, a place with a peculiar rule. Every guest had to wear a mask upon entry.
Song Xian chose a fox mask. Zhang Feng chose a wolf.
The interior was dim and elegant, and the kind of beautiful that made you forget you were hungry. They took a window seat upstairs, and Zhang Feng ordered with the confidence of someone who ate here often.
The foie gras was remarkable, he promised.
Song Xian liked Zhang Feng's ease, warmth without effort, friendship that cost nothing to maintain.
Being new here had made him feel small in ways he hadn't expected.
Having someone like Zhang Feng was genuinely something.
They were mid-conversation when piano music rose from downstairs. Song Xian had trained in dance since childhood, and music moved through him differently than it did most people.
This piece caught him somewhere deep.
He was wearing a mask. No one could recognize him, so he stood up and moved to the open floor near the tables.
He danced. His body found the piano's rhythm the way water finds a downward slope, naturally, without trying.
Every movement answered the music. Every gesture was a response.
Zhang Feng sat very still with his phone in his hand and started recording.
The audience around them went quiet. Tables stopped mid-conversation.
What was happening on that floor wasn't just dancing. It was dialogue between a body and a piano, neither leading, both listening.
When the last note faded, the room exploded into applause.
Upstairs, Song Xian took a small bow, assumed the applause was for his dance, and returned to his seat to eat. Downstairs, the pianist, a young woman named Liang Jing, assumed the applause was for her music, nodded calmly, and stepped out to take a phone call.
Neither of them knew the other existed.
Back at the table, Zhang Feng turned his phone screen toward Song Xian and showed him the recording.
Song Xian watched himself move across the floor with the easy pride of someone who had nothing to prove.
But downstairs, Liang Jing's friend had recorded the same performance from a different angle. And when Liang Jing's friend showed it to her upon her return, something unexpected happened. Liang Jing was a celebrated pianist, proud, precise, and entirely convinced that no dance could ever match her music. She had refused choreographic collaborations for years. But as she watched the video, her expression changed. The casual indifference dissolved into concentration and then into something close to joy.
Whoever had danced to her piano had matched it. Every note, every shift in tempo, every breath of silence between phrases.
This was a kindred spirit, a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Without stopping to think, she bolted out of the restaurant to find him. But the streets outside were empty. The fox-masked boy was long gone. Liang Jing split up with her friend Ziwanzi to search the nearby shops.
Ziwanzi wandered into Uncle Joe's shop and stopped cold.
On the counter, Uncle Joe was carefully polishing the jade pendant he had just acquired. Ziwanzi recognized it immediately. She asked to examine it. Uncle Joe, sensing wealth, obliged. She turned it over and found the engravings inside the clasp, 2 sets of initials, SQY and JMC.
The true love star of the Su family. In an antique shop in a foreign country.
Ziwanzi didn't hesitate. She photographed it and sent it directly to Su Qingyan.
Your family's true love heart has been stolen.
Song Xian and Zhang Feng were back on the train by then, squeezed by the window as the city flashed past.
Song Xian stared out the glass and felt his body go still.
A face in the crowd on a passing street. He shoved Zhang Feng's head aside and pressed his face to the glass.
He had seen a ghost.
Zhang Feng rolled his eyes. There were no ghosts in broad daylight.
Song Xian said quietly, "Then it must not have been a ghost."
Because the face he had seen was Ji Yang's, Ji Mingxuan's older sister, the one who had supposedly died years ago. The train carried him forward, and the figure vanished into the crowd behind him.
Song Xian leaned back against the car door
and let the thought settle.
Ji Xiyang faking her death, it was an extreme move, but an effective one.
Her death had pushed Ji Mingxuan into Su Qingyan's orbit as the most precious and tragic presence, the source of Su Qingyan's endless, inexplicable guilt. Song Xian took a breath and pushed the thought aside. His pain hadn't come from Ji Mingxuan. It had come from Su Qingyan.
Even without Ji Mingxuan, there would have been others she chose over him.
But still, a quiet curiosity surfaced at the edge of his mind. If Su Qingyan ever found out Ji Xiyan was alive, that she had been played from the very beginning, what expression would she make? That night, Su Qingyan set her work aside and boarded a private jet. She told no one where she was going. She brought no familiar staff. Just the arrangements she had already put in place and the name of the country where the pendant had been sold. He had gone abroad to study art. He was a painter. That narrowed everything down significantly. She began working through the logic before the plane had even lifted off. Art schools in this country first. If nothing there, every school in the country.
Song Xian could not be far. She would find him.
While Zi Wanzi was on the phone with Su Qingyan, Zhou Jing was sitting nearby and heard the name.
He went very still.
When the call ended, he offered a polite excuse to leave. Probably business, he said. Liang Jing waved it off. She wanted him to stay. Su Qingyan arrived within hours, stepping from a Rolls-Royce directly in front of the theater where they stood. She walked straight to Zi Wanzi and held out her hand without a greeting. Zi Wanzi placed the jade pendant box in her palm. Su Qingyan opened it, looked at the true love star. Her fingers tightened around the box. She asked to be taken to the shop where it was sold. The shop was closed when they arrived, the owner away, reopening date unknown. Su Qingyan's face tightened. She understood what that meant. As she turned to leave, her gaze briefly swept over Zhou Jing sitting in his wheelchair nearby. Zhou Jing lowered his head immediately. He wasn't foolish. He knew that glance had nothing to do with him. It was because he looked enough like Song Xian that she had noticed him at all. He had spent months deliberately imitating Song Xian's look, his habits, the way he dressed. To Su Qingyan, that fleeting look felt like mockery.
After her car pulled away, Liang Jing quietly observed what she had heard and seen.
She said to Zi Wanzi, the pendant's value wasn't in the jade itself. A Su family heirloom doesn't vanish by accident, and Su Qingyan hadn't flown here for a piece of jade.
Zi Wanzi thought about it and agreed.
Zhou Jing, listening carefully from his wheelchair, felt a chill go through him. He said slowly, Song Xian ran away recently. Su Qingyan has been searching nonstop. Song Xian must have sold that pendant. Liang Jing shook her head gently. She didn't think Song Xian would go that far.
Zi Wanzi smiled with sudden understanding. He would, because that pendant had someone else's name engraved inside.
7 years devoted to Su Qingyan, and the betrothal jade bore Ji Mingxuan's initials.
Of course he got rid of it. Of course.
Zhou Jing processed this and felt the cold crystallize into genuine fear. If Su Qingyan was here, and she was searching art schools, she would find Song Xian. And if Song Xian was found, everything Zhou Jing had built would collapse in a single conversation.
Liang Jing believed the dancer was Zhou Jing. She had confirmed it by scent at the restaurant entrance.
But Zhou Jing had been imitating Song Xian's cologne, his clothes, his entire silhouette.
She hadn't confirmed Zhou Jing. She had confirmed Song Xian and misidentified the body attached to him.
Zhou Jing asked quietly if he could be taken back to the hotel.
He said he was tired. Liang Jing walked him there herself, gentle and attentive in a way that made his chest tight. She told him she would come for him tomorrow for the airport. Same flight home.
The moment she and Zi Wanzi were gone, Zhou Jing grabbed his manager Wang Hao by the sleeve. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper.
Su Qingyan was here. She was going to find Song Xian. Song Xian could not be found.
Wang Hao listened and nodded slowly. He said, "Don't worry. Song Xian won't be found by Su Qingyan. He will disappear from this world without a trace."
Zhou Jing stared at him.
Wang Hao's expression didn't change. He had a contact in this country, someone from his youth, now deep in organized crime.
1 or 2 foreign visitors going quietly missing. No one would investigate too carefully.
Wang Hao had made his decision. As long as Song Xian existed, this was a ticking bomb. The only way to make the secret permanent was to make Song Xian disappear permanently.
Song Xian arrived home that evening to the smell of cooking from the kitchen.
The Jiaoyi was already inside, moving between the stove and the counter, completely at ease. The ambiguity that had been building between them over the past week was getting harder to ignore.
Her birthday was in 2 days. He had already bought her gift, a watch, a confession wrapped in metal and glass.
He tucked it upstairs quietly, hoping she hadn't noticed.
She had noticed. She said nothing.
The next afternoon after class, Song Xian was cycling back to campus with a sketchbook when a man stepped into his path and called his name.
The man introduced himself as Wang Hao.
Song Xian said he didn't know him and had no reason to talk to strangers.
Wang Hao called out one name as Song Xian turned to leave. Qingyan is here.
Song Xian stopped a bite.
Wang Hao produced a photograph. Qingyan standing outside Uncle Joe's shop. Timestamp last night.
Song Xian's chest pained.
He had sold the pendant only that morning. She had arrived the same night.
Selling it had been a mistake. A visible, traceable mistake.
Wang Hao watched his face and smiled knowingly.
The pendant's reputation had done it. A socialite from the capital recognized it immediately and brought it straight to Qingyan.
His location was already known. It was only a matter of time now.
Wang Hao offered help, a friend who could move Song Xian to another city without any trail.
Song Xian looked at him for a long moment. He asked the only relevant question, "Why would you help me?"
Wang Hao smiled and said he was Qingyan's sworn enemy. Watching her fail to find Song Xian gave him pleasure.
Song Xian said he needed to discuss it with a friend first. Wang Hao handed him a business card and gave him a deadline, 1 day.
If he could find Song Xian this fast, Qingyan wouldn't be much slower.
He walked away with practiced calm. The moment he was out of sight, Song Xian dropped the card in the nearest trash bin.
He had recognized Wang Hao from the moment he saw him, standing beside Zhou Jing the day before.
Wang Hao's face carried the same bone structure as Zhang Yun, Zhou Jing's biological mother.
He knew who Wang Hao was, and he knew what Wang Hao's kindness was worth.
Song Xian watched Wang Hao's car pull away from a distance and said quietly, "Bad intentions bring car accidents."
The words had barely left his mouth before Wang Hao's rear tire slipped.
The car fishtailed, smashed through a guardrail, and plunged into the river beside the road.
It was school dismissal hour. Students flooded the street.
Someone dove in immediately. Someone else found a rock and smashed the driver's side window.
Wang Hao was dragged out unconscious, the airbag unfired, blood from his head and glass in his arm.
A man in black appeared from somewhere and carried him toward the hospital at a run.
Song Xian turned and walked home.
But Wang Hao had been right about one thing. Qingyan was close.
The Jiaoyi was away that night, an invitation-only art exhibition with her teacher, no communication allowed.
She wouldn't be back until the following evening.
Song Xian sat with the quiet of the house and clasped his hands together. He hoped Qingyan would be delayed. Even a few days was enough.
That night, he woke from a nightmare, gasping, his back soaked through.
He had dreamed of handcuffs, of Qingyan locking him in place. He sat in the dark and reminded himself it was only a dream.
Qingyan was capable of it. He genuinely believed that, but it was only a dream.
He got up for water and noticed it, a pungent smell rising from downstairs.
He walked to the top of the stairs and made out a figure moving in the shadows below. He called out, "Who is there?"
The figure struck a lighter and threw it.
Flames spread across the floor in seconds.
Song Xian ran for the upstairs door. It had been sealed from the outside.
Someone had locked him in. Someone wanted him to burn. He covered his face and pounded on the window with everything he had.
The smoke hit his lungs, and the world began to tilt. He kept moving, a rechargeable desk lamp in his hand, swinging it at the glass to make light, to make noise.
The fire
was faster. The house was mostly wood. It didn't resist. He slid down the wall and onto the floor, coughing, vision narrowing. Through the haze, he thought he heard a voice.
It sounded impossibly like Qingyan.
He gave a bitter smile in the dark. He was hallucinating. Of course he was. Above him, a beam gave way in the heat.
He fell. He closed his eyes. Something wet landed on his face.
And then there was nothing.
Song Xian woke to the sharp scent of disinfectant and white light filling the ceiling.
He opened his eyes onto a room that was clean and expensive and completely unfamiliar.
An IV drip ran into his hand. Beside him in the bed, someone else lay very still. Face pale, eyes closed, expression tight, even in unconsciousness. Song Xian stared at the ceiling and thought, even after death, I still can't get away from her. A man in a white coat pushed open the door with a syringe in hand.
He introduced himself as Wei Zing, Qingyan's personal doctor.
Song Xian looked at him and began to understand that he was not, in fact, dead. Wei Zing administered the injection to Qingyan's arm without interrupting his explanation. When the beam fell, she had shielded him with her body. Her back had taken the burn. She had carried him out of the fire. She was the voice he had heard in the smoke.
That had not been a hallucination at all.
Wei Zing looked at Song Xian with calm curiosity. What was their relationship exactly? She had risked her life to pull him out. He asked if she had come here looking for someone. Had she been looking for him?
Song Xian had no answer that would make any sense.
He looked at Qingyan, the thick bandages wrapped across her back, the tight, pained stillness of her face. He sat with the contradiction he had lived with for 7 years.
Every time it had come to a choice between him and Ji Mingxuan, she chose Ji Mingxuan, without hesitation. Every time.
But when Ji Mingxuan wasn't there, when it was Song Xian and a cliff or Song Xian and a fire, she moved without thinking. She jumped off cliffs for him. She rushed into flames for him.
Was Qingyan split in two?
He told Wei Zing he would go rest in another room, stood up, and reached for his hand.
It didn't move.
Even unconscious, Qingyan's grip on his hand was absolute.
Wei Zing looked at the two of them, quietly pleased, and told Song Xian simply, "Stay." She definitely didn't want him to leave. Song Xian sat back down. He tried twice more to pull free. Neither attempt worked. He gave up, leaned against the headboard, and stared at the far wall. The fire, the pendant, Wang Hao, everything threaded together clearly in the quiet. Wang Hao had arranged for him to be burned alive. He was almost certain of it.
He made a quiet promise to himself. Don't let him get away with it.
The IV had something in it that pulled him under before he finished the thought.
He woke to an arm around his waist.
He jolted upright and struggled.
A muffled groan sounded by his ear, Qingyan's voice, cold but frayed with pain.
Don't move.
He pulled her hand carefully from his waist and got out of the bed. Qingyan shifted and braced herself against the pillow. She scanned him top to bottom, checking for damage. When she was satisfied he was unharmed, something in her face loosened by a fraction. Then she said quietly, "Don't run around alone. It's dangerous abroad. If I hadn't come, you would have died." The words were factual. They were also true. Song Xian couldn't argue with either.
He looked at her, the woman who had chosen Ji Mingxuan at every important moment, lying here with a burned back, burned for him.
He let out a slow breath. "So, Qingyan, we have already broken up. I like my life here. Can you just let me go?" She looked at him steadily. Then she asked, "Is it because of the woman living with you?" Her voice was measured, but he heard the anger underneath it, held between her teeth. He didn't correct her. He said, "If that's what you want to think." She reached beside the bed and placed the jade pendant box on the surface between them. She asked why he had sold it. He looked at the box and felt something shift in his chest. Not regret exactly, but close.
If he had sent the money through Xinwei Shao, none of this would have happened.
She wouldn't have found him. The fire wouldn't have been set.
He looked at her and let the words come straight. Don't you think you're being hypocritical? You act innocent with me, then vent all your anger on me. How long will you keep lying to yourself?
She stared at him. She said she genuinely didn't understand.
He picked up the pendant and opened the clasp and held it out to her. He told her to look at the engraving inside before she insisted the pendant was made for him. Her eyes moved to the clasp. He watched her eyelashes tremble as she found it. She went very still. Then she closed her fist around the pendant and took a long breath. When she opened her eyes again, her face was controlled. She said the names had been his and hers when she ordered it. She didn't know how it ended up wrong.
Song Xian looked at her without warmth.
Qingyan, do you believe your own words? If you had submitted those names personally, who would dare engrave them differently? That wasn't impossible, but the reason it happened at all was because her assistant had passed the task off. And he passed it off because he knew, everyone knew, Song Xian wasn't important enough to be careful about.
Qingyan took out her phone and called her assistant.
Her voice was cold enough to cut.
The assistant confessed within seconds. He had been busy and handed it off without checking. The pendant had come back with the wrong engraving, and he had given it to Qingyan without looking inside. Qingyan told him to pack his things and leave. It was the first time her anger had found an outlet in days.
When she hung up, Song Xian let out a cold breath.
So, to verify things, why didn't you verify before handing it to me? Because everyone around you knew you didn't care enough. That's why no one was careful.
If this pendant had been worth 100 billion, Lu Chan wouldn't have dared pass it off to anyone.
Li Chen wouldn't have dared to tamper with the engraving. The reason they were careless was the same reason the mistake was possible at all. Because everyone who worked for Qingyan had learned, by watching her, that Song Xian did not matter. Qingyan had no words left. Not because she was dismissing him, because she was genuinely unable to form a response. He could see it. She had known. She had been played too, in her own way, by her own people. And even that realization didn't fix anything. The damage had been done across 7 years, not one pendant.
Song Xian took a slow breath and looked at her plainly.
Qingyan. I want to leave because loving you is too painful, too humiliating. Can you let me go?
She looked at him without speaking.
She did not let him go. But something in the room had changed. For the first time, the coldness in her face wasn't armor. It was confusion. The kind that comes when someone finally understands something they can't undo. In the capital, Chang Susu visited the clinic and sat across from Gu Yuyu. The question she had been avoiding all week finally came out. If Qingyan really developed feelings for Song Xian, feelings she didn't have the capacity for, what happens next? Gu Yuyu was quiet for a long time. She said carefully, Qingyan may have spent 10 years suppressing her disorder through sheer willpower. And Song Xian, without knowing it, had become the anchor that made that possible. The moment he was gone, the anchor lifted. The storm had been waiting a long time. Meanwhile, in a hospital bed thousands of miles away, Qingyan lay with her burned back and her hand still reaching for Song Xian. She had found him. She had saved him. She had flown here in the middle of the night without telling anyone. But she still had no words for what she felt. And Song Xian, sitting beside her, had run out of the language of waiting. 7 years. 7 years of choosing to love someone who couldn't explain why she kept reaching for him, while choosing someone else every single time. That was the truth that sat in the room between them. Too old to argue, too heavy to move. Back in the cafe, Cheng Susu's phone lit up. Zhang Xiaoxiao again. Su Qingyan had been found. She had flown abroad on her own, without notice, and was now in a medical facility overseas.
Chang Susu put the phone down and stared at the wall.
She had been the one who said, "You don't really think I'm giving her a chance, do you?"
She had been the one standing at the door when Song Xian said Su Qingyan would fail in 3 days.
He had been right. He was always right about Su Qingyan. But what no one had predicted, not Song Xian, not Chang Susu, not Gu Yuyu, was this: that Su Qingyan would fly into a burning building for a man she couldn't admit she loved.
That her body would move before her mind could veto it.
That the woman who had never fought for anyone would fight gravity and fire and smoke for Song Xian.
Ji Mingxuan's deceptions had begun to unravel on the night of the banquet. Chang Susu had brought a traditional medicine doctor to the hospital and proven the blood was chicken's blood, carried in a pouch, spit at the perfect moment.
Ji Mingxuan had lain motionless until a cup of boiling water was pressed against his hand, and he leaped from the bed screaming.
And even then, he had tried to explain. He just liked her. He had done nothing wrong.
Chang Susu had demolished that argument without raising her voice. Being a homewrecker, pretending, causing chaos, all of it under the name of love, and he claimed to have done nothing wrong?
Ji Mingxuan had roared back. Song Xian deserved it. Su Qingyan had never liked him. He had only stayed because of a life-saving debt.
And then, Su Qingyan, cold and still as stone, had spoken.
Who told you I don't like him?
5 words that had silenced the room. 5 words she had never once said to Song Xian's face. Ji Mingxuan had been exposed. Su Qingyan had cut him off. But Song Xian had already been gone before any of that happened.
He had never heard those 5 words.
And now he was sitting in a white room abroad with her hand in his and the pendant on the table, and no more room for anything to be unsaid.
Su Qingyan looked at the jade pendant for a long time.
Song Xian watched her hold the 7 years in her hands and not know what to do with them.
She had always been better at holding on than at letting go.
Better at protecting things from the outside than understanding what was happening inside herself.
The engraving had not been her fault entirely, but the conditions that made it possible had been.
She had created a world around her where Song Xian didn't count, where he could be overlooked, where no one bothered to check. He hadn't been invisible. She had made him that way, through distance, through indifference, through 100 small moments where she turned toward Ji Mingxuan instead. And still, he had loved her, quietly and completely, and without needing her to know. Until the night he slapped her across the face in front of 200 people and walked out.
Su Qingyan set the pendant down on the table between them.
She said, "I'll give you an explanation for all of it."
Song Xian looked at her.
He had waited 7 years for an explanation. He wasn't sure one was still useful now.
But the thing about Su Qingyan, the thing that had always confused him, was this.
She was not lying. Not right now. Not in this room with her burned back and her bare face and the pendant between them.
She was as lost as he was, just in a different language.
And somewhere across town, in a hotel room with his leg in a fake cast, Zhou Jing had no idea his plan had already begun to fray.
Liang Jing had given him everything. Connections, a debut slot, her attention, her time.
All of it built on a lie. All of it borrowed from a man who was still very much alive. Zhou Jing had believed that as long as Song Xian stayed hidden, the secret was safe. But Wang Hao was now unconscious in a hospital bed, with glass in his arm and no memory of the crash.
And Song Xian was awake.
The bomb had not been defused. It had simply not gone off yet.
The town was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that only exists far from the places that know your name.
Song Xian sat in the white room and thought about the Jiaoyi, her birthday 2 days away, the watch hidden upstairs, the confession he had planned. He thought about Zhang Feng showing him the video on the train home and laughing. He thought about the fox mask and the piano music and the way his body had moved like it was finally free. He thought about all of it.
And then he looked at Su Qingyan.
He said,
I already have a life here. I don't want to go back.
Qingyan's face didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. She had come this far for him. She had burned for him.
And she still couldn't say the thing that might make him stay.
Not because she didn't feel it, but because she had spent her entire life not knowing how to say it.
The pendant sat on the table between them.
The wrong names inside. The right person holding it.
Everything about them had always been like that. True in the substance, wrong in the execution.
Song Xian reached over and picked the pendant up one last time.
He looked at it for a long moment.
Then he placed it back in Qingyan's hand and closed her fingers around it. Whatever that pendant had meant was hers to carry now.
He had already walked out of the engagement twice. He had walked out of the banquet. He had walked out of the capital entirely.
Each time he had hoped she would stop him. Each time he had already known she wouldn't.
And yet this time, lying in a foreign bed with an IV in his arm and her burned hand wrapped around it, he felt something he hadn't expected.
Not hope exactly. Something quieter than that.
The possibility that Qingyan was not who he had decided she was.
Not the woman who always chose Ji Mingxuan, but a woman who didn't know what she felt until the moment she was running into a burning house to find out.
That didn't fix 7 years.
It didn't erase the banquet, or the pendant, or the 3 days she spent hiding instead of choosing.
But it was real. And real things, even complicated, painful, late-arriving things, have weight.
Song Xian looked at the ceiling of the white room and didn't say anything for a long time.
Qingyan didn't push. She just held the pendant and stayed.
Outside, the town was still blooming, flowers all the way to the horizon.
The kind of place that made people believe they could start over. He didn't know yet what he would decide. He didn't know what she was capable of becoming.
He didn't know if Zhou Jing's lies would surface before the Starlight program began, or if Wang Hao would wake up and remember who he had sent into Songxian Street.
He didn't know if Ji Shiyang was truly alive or if his eyes had tricked him on a moving train.
He didn't know if Ji Mingxuan would accept being cut off or spiral into something more dangerous.
He didn't know if Qingyan's disorder would stabilize now that she had found him, or if the stability required more than proximity.
What he knew was this: he was alive.
He was alive, and it was because of her.
And whatever came next, that fact would not disappear.
Qingyan had never once said she loved him in 7 years. But she had walked into a burning building. And sometimes, for people who have never learned the language of love, the body says what the mouth cannot.
The fire had been set to erase him. Instead, it had burned away everything that wasn't necessary.
What remained in that white room was simpler and more honest than anything their 7 years together had ever produced. Two people who had hurt each other in ways that couldn't be undone.
And a question neither of them had asked out loud yet. What do you do with something broken, if it's still the most real thing you've ever had?
Song Xian closed fries.
The pendant was in her hand. The IV drip was still running. The ceiling was white and quiet, and a long way from everything he had ever known.
7 years had brought them here, not to an ending, and not yet to a beginning. To something harder and more honest than either. The question was no longer whether he could leave, it was whether, having seen her run into the fire, he still wanted to.